Hi, college. Okay, here is our introduction to our new unit called intervals. So please take a moment to read through the topics that we'll be talking about this quarter. College, please make sure that you have staff paper ready to go and note-taking paper for today's video presentation. Okay, so let's talk about what the term interval means. Well, the basic definition is 2 notes. But a more specific definition of an interval is the distance between 2 notes. However, the definition that I am looking for is that an interval is the relationship between 2 notes. So 2 notes or pitches that are far apart form a large interval. 2 notes or pitches that are close together form a small interval. So take a moment to read these true and false questions and provide the answer. So the first one, the greater the distance between 2 pitches, the smaller the interval. Hopefully you said false. For the second one, the smaller the distance between 2 pitches, the smaller the interval. And that indeed is true. So what's so great about intervals anyway? Well, intervals are the building blocks of relative pitch. This is the sense of pitch we rely on most often to understand, create, and even just appreciate music. So relative pitch is a vital listening skill, and intervals are the building blocks of relative pitch. So why spend time doing interval ear training? Well, knowing what intervals are and how they are important for improving your sense of relative pitch is very important. But you might still be left wondering how exactly ear training intervals will help you in music. Well, the first and most obvious reason is that interval ear training lets you identify intervals in music. When you hear a pair of notes, you'll be able to recognize the interval, such as a perfect fourth, and know how far apart they are in semitones. Why is that useful? Well, if you were picking out a melody on your instrument, you might know in your head how the melody goes. We call that audiation. But to be able to connect it with your instrument, you need to know something more specific. like which notes to play or which notes to sing. So by hearing the notes in your head and recognizing the intervals between them, you'll know how far to move from one note to the next. And so you'll be able to play the melody on your instrument or sing it. Suppose you are a songwriter. You might want to write down your music on manuscript paper, enter it into computer music software. After doing interval ear training, you'll be able to write down the notes that represent the music you want to create, without being dependent on trial and error note picking on a piano keyboard. So recognizing intervals by ear is helpful in this simple, direct way, and we'll be spending some time this quarter recognizing intervals by ear. As already mentioned, there is actually a much broader and more powerful way that ear training intervals helps you as a musician. It improves your sense of relative pitch. Interval ear training is actually a form of relative pitch ear training, so it builds up your ability to recognize notes based on the other notes present. What does that mean? It means that instead of hearing just a jumble of unknown notes, you will be able to recognize the relationship between all the notes. So for example, if you know what key you're in, or what one of the chords in a song is, you'll be able to work out all the other chords just by ear. If you know what note the tune starts on, you'll be able to work out all the other notes just using your sense of relative pitch. It's vital for improvisation too, because relative pitch lets you connect what you hear in your head with what you're playing on your instrument, and taking your musical improvisations wherever you want them to go. So in summary, relative pitch is a powerful skill for any musician to have, and interval ear training is a fast way to acquire a strong sense of relative pitch. And you can read this quote by Albert Einstein. So college, I don't expect you to copy down, obviously, the notes that we just read, but hopefully you got the importance of intervals and interval ear training, which we're going to spend the majority of this quarter on. Okay, so now it's on to talk about harmonic intervals and melodic intervals. Here's where you may want to take some notes. So what's the difference? Well, harmonic intervals are two pitches that sound together, that is, at the same time. Melodic intervals are two pitches that sound consecutively, that is, one after the other. Below, in measure 1, we have an example of a melodic interval. First comes the C4, followed by the E4. In the second measure, we have a harmonic interval. Both the C4 and E4 are played simultaneously. You will discover later on that the name of the interval in this example remains the same because the distance is the same. The difference lies in whether they sound simultaneously, or harmonic, or in succession, which is melodic. So we're going to talk about generic names of intervals, the identity of an interval, and this goes for both harmonic and melodic intervals, is determined by two things: the quantity and the quality. The quantity means the total number of letter names an interval contains. Quantity gives us a general measurement. For example, a third or a fifth. Quality, on the other hand, is the total number of half steps an interval contains. When we talk about quality, we're looking for an exact measurement. We'll discover later on that there are two main groups. There are perfect intervals and major minor intervals. Right now, we're going to spend our focus on quantity and not worry so much about quality until later on. So we're going to spend time on quantity, that is, the total number of letter names an interval contains. So with quantity, what we need to keep in mind is we want to count our lines and spaces to determine the relationship between the two notes, or the interval. The first step in naming an interval is finding the distance between the notes as they're written on the staff. The quantity, or number size, of an interval is based on the number of lines and spaces contained by the interval on the music staff. Musicians and composers use different names to indicate the quantity of intervals, and I have some intervals right here in these measures that you can see. So in the first measure, we have unison interval, or prime. You might see a P, and that means that the interval is unison, the same exact pitch. And then we have our seconds, and our thirds, and our fourths, and our fifths, sixths, sevenths, and our octave. Let's continue. So, remember this. To determine the quantity of an interval, all you need to do is count the number of lines and spaces between the two pitches and come up with the number. We don't have to worry about accidentals with quantity. So for this first assignment here, what we need to do is write the interval quantity, whether it's unison or we can write a P, because we know that unison means prime. Or we can write 2 for seconds, 3 for third, 4 for fourths, 5 for fifths, 6 for sixths, 7 for sevenths, or 8 for octaves. So please take a look at all of these measures below and determine the interval quantity. You have limited time, so good luck. And time is up. So hopefully, college, you were able to do this relatively quickly in the time allotted. So let's take a look at the first measure, and you can see that we have an E up to a D. Remember, accidentals do not count. So an E up to D, we're starting at the E and counting up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is a seventh. So we write the number 7. And in the next measure, we have an E to an A. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the next measure, a D to a G, that's a fourth. In the next measure, looks like we have a line right up to the next space, that would be a second. In measure 5, we have a G to a C, that's a fourth. In the next measure, we have an E to an E, that's an 8. Remember, we're not concerned with accidentals right now. We're only concerned where the note is written. In the next one, we have a B to a D. That's a third. And in the last one, we have a B and a B, same line. That would be prime. If you wrote 1, that's also acceptable. Or if you wrote U, that would be acceptable because that's unison. And that's really all there is to it when we have to try to determine the the generic quantity. We're just looking for a number. Okay, so hopefully you remember what harmonic and melodic means, because those are two different types of intervals. Remember that harmonic intervals sound simultaneously, so they'll be one on top of another, and melodic intervals are in succession, one before the other. Because now our next activity is to look at the given interval quantities and construct the interval accordingly. So you're actually going to now notate an interval. And remember, we're not doing any accidentals. All we want to do is look at the given information and supply an answer. So let's do the first one together before you're on your own. So in the first measure, we have an E, and the directions say that we need to provide a harmonic third below the E. Well, we know that harmonic intervals are intervals that sound at the same time, and we need to go a third below the note that's written. So I can simply call that note 1. That would be a space, that's 2. And then here would be the C, which is a harmonic third below the E. And that would be the answer for number 1. Now, in number 2, if you look carefully, we need a melodic fourth above. So these notes, these intervals, this interval will not sound at the same time. They will sound in succession. So we need to go above the note that's written. So we count up from the note 1, 2, 3, 4. And since it's melodic, I'm going to draw my note right there. If the directions said we need a harmonic fourth above, then I'd have to put my note right here, because that would be harmonically played. So hopefully you get the idea with this, and now I'm going to give you some limited time to finish 6 other examples here, but please read the directions carefully if they ask you for harmonic or melodic, and either above or below. Good luck, college. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get all of them, or at least most of them, completed. So harmonic 6th below. So we're counting from the D down 6, including the D. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there. And it's harmonic, so I have to write them one on top of the other. In the next one, we need a melodic 5th above. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's melodic. In the next one, we need a melodic 7th above. 5, 6, 7. And it's melodic, so I'll have to draw it to the side. In the next one, a melodic 3rd above. Thirds are really easy. When you think thirds, you can think line, line, or space, space. When you think fifths, like this example, you can think line, line, or space, space. When you think thirds or fifths, you can think line, line, or space, space. In the next example, we need a harmonic 2nd above. So harmonic is sounded simultaneously, so I'm going to put it right next to the B, touching it. If, for example, actually in the next example, you'll see how seconds can look melodically. So in the last example, we have a B, and we need a melodic 2nd above. So that's how I would write my melodic 2nd, as opposed to my harmonic 2nd, which is right here. That's a harmonic 2nd, and the last one is melodic 2nd. So hopefully you did okay with this. Keep in mind that you can watch this video as often as you like, as it's up on the YouTube channel, if you need to review or you're having trouble understanding some of the concepts. Let's proceed. Remember, you determine the interval quantity by simply adding up the lines and spaces included in the interval. you must count every line and every space between the notes, as well as the lines or spaces that the notes are on. So accidentals can be ignored when counting interval quantity. And it's worth mentioning that instead of eighth, we use the word octave. And instead of first, we use the word unison, or even better, we use prime. So what I'd like you to do now is take a look at all of these examples, treat each one individually. In other words, see the double bar line? And there are 14 examples altogether, all in treble clef. And what I need you to do is provide the generic name or the quantity for each of these intervals. So you're just going to come up with the number and write the number underneath each measure. Good luck, college. You should be done with the first line. Okay, and let's check our answers, and hopefully you're doing this kind of quickly because it's not too terribly hard or difficult just to find the generic number. So check over your work. And you notice, remember, with the sevens and the fives, here's a 5, here's a 7, here's a 5. I circled all of those because all of those, when you're dealing with the odd numbers, 3, 5, and 7, you can look at the interval and think, okay, it's a space to a space or a line to a line. If you look at the even intervals, 2, 4, 6, and 8, you notice that one of the notes is written on a line and the other will be written on a space. So this is a little bit of the generic quantity of intervals, and we're going to go on. Hopefully you did well with that. Did you know that you can even determine interval quantities in 4-part choral writing, both harmonically and melodically, and between all voice parts? So what we need to do is take a look at the arrows. There's all different arrows here with different colors. And what you need to do is supply the interval quantity for the examples below. Wherever the arrows are, they're connecting 2 notes. And when we're done with that, we have some review questions down here at the bottom, which we will get a chance to answer. So let's do the first one together. We're looking at the red arrow, and the red arrow is going here from the tenor voice, pointing upward to the alto voice. So the interval that we need to compare to find the generic quantity is going to be this C sharp to this F sharp. Now remember, the sharps don't matter when you're talking just about the generic quantity. We're just looking for the number. So we can take out the sharps and just say, okay, what is the distance from a C up to an F? Well, the answer would be a 4. And if I want to get really technical, I could tell you that this interval is a harmonic interval because the altos and the tenors will sing their notes simultaneously. So take a moment to look at the other arrows and come up with your number. Okay, college, so hopefully you came up with some answers. Let's take a look at the green arrow. Looks like we have an A to an E, up to an E, so that is the generic quantity of a fifth. The pink arrow looks like we're have an E to a C, so that's going to be a third. That interval is melodic because it's not sounded simultaneously, it's sounded consecutively. The next one, the orange arrow, we're comparing the A to the A, and that would be an octave. Our blue arrow is in the soprano voice, staying on the same note, A to A, so that would be prime. Our yellow arrow is all the way down in the bass voice. It's a melodic interval, and we have a D to an E, and that is going to be a second. And our last arrow is harmonically, and it's an E up to a D, and that is a seventh. So hopefully you did okay with determining the generic intervals in choral writing. Get used to seeing choral writing because as the year progresses on, we're going to examine more of our soprano, alto, tenor, and bass voices. And now, here are some review questions. Let's see how well you do with some of these. So take a moment to answer these while you look at the music. Okay, college, let's check your answers to these questions here and see how you did. So the first question, what key or keys could this music be written in? Well, if I look at the key signature, I can determine the major key and the minor key. So I would say 3 sharps could be A major or F sharp minor. What are all the 4 voice parts written on? Hopefully you didn't say the staff. Hopefully you said a grand staff, because we're using both the treble clef and bass clef, and it's bracketed by a brace. What voices have stems up? Well, hopefully you said soprano, and hopefully you said tenor. And which voices have stems down? Hopefully you said alto and bass. Now, if you look very carefully, you can see that the stem direction differs when you're talking about choral music. You know, back in quarter 1 and the beginning of quarter 2, we talked about how you have to have a certain kind of stem direction depending on where the note is written on the staff. Well, that applies to individual solo passages. When you're dealing with 4-part chorus music, such as soprano, alto, tenor, bass, you need to make sure that for sopranos, they always have their stems up, altos have their stems down, and that's to differentiate so you know which voice part is singing what note, because they're written both in treble clef on the same staff. And same with tenor and bass. So the tenors, the stems will be up for them to sing, and the bass stems will be down to sing. And this applies to 4-part choral music. This piece begins with what quarter 1 musical term? Hopefully you realize that it's an incomplete measure. It begins with a pickup, so it begins with an anacrusis. Name all 4 voices in order from highest to lowest. Soprano is the highest voice, then the alto, then the tenor, and then the bass. And I'm sure this is very easy and review for chorus students. Okay, this one you really couldn't do at your seat, so you can help me do it. In the tenor and bass, circle all intervals that exceed an octave. Okay, so let's look carefully. And I should actually specify this and write circle all harmonic intervals that exceed an octave. So, the anacrusis does. That is more than an octave, so I can circle that one. And beat 1 of this measure exceeds an octave as well. And it looks like the very last chord also exceeds an octave. And I think that's pretty much it. So hopefully you did well with this page, college. We're going to continue on now to our next frame. Okay, be ready to tell me the following for the 7 examples above. Well, there's actually 8 examples, not 7. And question 1 is the interval melodic or harmonic? And question 2, provide the generic name of the interval. So, your time starts now. Okay, so hopefully you realized that number 1 is melodic, number 5 is melodic, number 8 is melodic, and the others are harmonic because they are sounded simultaneously. And we can go back now and we can plug in the generic number. So number 1, that's a melodic second. Number 2 is a harmonic second. See how they're touching? So that's how you know it's a harmonic second. But number 1 is a melodic second because the notes are spread apart a little bit further. Number 3 is a harmonic third. Number 4 is a harmonic fourth. Number 5 is a melodic fourth. Number 6 is a harmonic seventh. Number 7 is a harmonic fourth. Number 8 is a melodic third. Notice that we don't even need a clef. There's no treble clef, there's no bass clef, no alto, no tenor clef, because all we're looking for is the generic number or the quantity. So hopefully you did okay with that, college. Let's move on. So you now know the generic names of intervals. I need you to look at the 3 melodic intervals below and see if you can answer these questions that I have here. Do these 3 melodic intervals have the same interval quantity or a different interval quantity? And you'll need to justify your response. The next question, what is the interval quantity for all 3 examples above? So take a moment to answer those questions. So, college, do these 3 melodic intervals have the same interval quantity or different interval quantity? If you said the same, you would be correct. They are the same, because when we're dealing with interval quantity, we're talking about just the generic number. And the generic number for all 3 of these intervals above is the number 3. And that answers the next question. Okay, college, so at this point, we're going to just review. You should now be able to define the following terms. An interval is the relationship between two notes. The term melodic refers to notes played or sounded in succession, or one after the other. The term harmonic refers to notes played or sounded simultaneously or at the same time. When we see the abbreviation CST in our packets, we're talking about a chromatic semitone or half step. And the term generic quantity refers to the basic number of the interval. You should also now be able to identify the generic number or quantity of intervals within an octave. Prime, seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and octaves. You should also be able to look at an interval and indicate whether it is sounded harmonically or melodically. And you should be able to identify the 4 vocal parts in choral music from highest to lowest voice, as well as the stem direction for each voice. So we have the soprano, stems up, highest voice. Alto, stems down. Both soprano and alto read in treble clef. Tenor, stems up. Bass, stems down. Bass, the lowest voice. Tenor and bass read in bass clef, although tenors do sometimes read in treble clef. And in our next video, we'll be moving on to talk about the other part of intervals, not the quantity, but the quality. So when we talk about the quality, you'll discover that accidentals and clef signs become key to determining the specific interval. Thanks for watching, AP. Have a great day.